Okay, today I am joined by SB Divya, science fiction writer. So, Divya, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Divya is the author of Meru, which is this book I recently reviewed on my channel. Kind of richly imagined space opera set in, well, quite far into the future. I really enjoyed this book. And the sequel, which is called Loka, and this is a new release. It's just come out, and I've just been reading this book. So congratulations on getting Loka published.
Thank you.
And I believe, um, I think this is your third novel to be published. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. Third
Okay.
novel, fifth book.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed both of those books, and I think if anything, I might have enjoyed Loka even more than
Oh,
Meru.
great.
So yeah,
That's always
yeah.
good to hear.
Yeah, so we can talk about those books in a minute, but first, before we do, perhaps we could talk a little bit about your background and your what got you into writing science fiction, if that's okay.
Yeah. I started writing science fiction when I was 13, but I started reading it a few years before then. Fell in love with the genre with my very first book that my school librarian handed to me, which was The Green Book by Jill Patton Walsh. Not hugely well known, especially these days, but it just clicked for me and just kind of set me on this lifelong journey. And the first science fiction I wrote was actually this little snippet in my eighth grade English class. And it was supposed to be a short story that we wrote in class and then exchanged with a friend, and we would sort of critique each other's work. Um, my friend, my classmate, pointed out that I had left the ending very, very ambiguous and cliffhangery as to the fate of the protagonist and insisted that I give her the rest of the story. So she was my first fan. And I wrote kind of just for fun here and there through my teenage years. And then when I went off to college, I went to Caltech for my undergraduate studies, and that kind of kicked my ass. And I stopped writing fiction. I really just kind of focused on science and then eventually my engineering career for a very long time. Every now and then I would write a little something, but never very seriously, and kept thinking it would be something I'd do after retirement until I had my first child. And a few years into that, um, I really felt like I needed something for me in my own time. I was working full time as an engineer. I was married, I had a household, I had a kid, and I don't know, I just kind of felt like I was losing myself a little bit. So I started carving out 1 hour every night to work on writing. I took a class and I decided to start submitting for publication for the first time in my life. So I got a bit of a late start, I guess, but it's worked out incredibly well. I've been very, very lucky. And as of a few years ago, after I got sick with COVID and then developed long COVID, I have not been working any sort of engineering job and just focused on writing and maintaining my health at this point.
Okay. So do you think that your background as an engineer and all the years you spent in that career, has that had any kind of direct influence in your writing?
Yeah, I would say so. I actually started out in physics and astronomy, intending to go into astrophysics. And about halfway through my undergraduate studies, I decided maybe the academic life wasn't the one I wanted to pursue, and I switched to an interdisciplinary department called computational neuroscience. And I studied machine learning, signal processing, neurobiology. And it was really interesting. I graduated in the mid 90s, at the start of the first dot-com boom. So I ended up getting a job in, not in dot-com, but in medical devices. pretty easily, and it kind of set me on a very particular path. And I've done some work in machine learning and pattern recognition here and there, and that was a big influence on my first novel, Machinehood, which is all about artificial intelligence, artificial sentience, what that might mean, how it's going to impact our world in the next 3/4 of, of the century. And with Meru, I drew a little bit more on my interest in astrophysics and fundamental physics, um, as well as some of the biology and biotech side. I'm interested in everything. So I think one of the great benefits for me of becoming a science fiction writer is that I've had more time to devote to research, much more than I did as a busy engineer working in the tech sector.
Right.
Now I get to, delve into whatever topic interests me, keep abreast of kind of what's happening on many fronts, and it's just been really fun. And I guess I have enough, you know, I have a little knowledge enough to feel comfortable with a lot of the basics of these subjects, and enough to kind of be more sciencey in my writing, I guess.
Right. Because I think one of the big themes in Meru and Loka is genetic engineering or genetic
Right.
manipulation, and possible future paths that the human species could take. In fact, how would you introduce Meru for those not familiar with it or not familiar with your work? How would you describe this novel?
I generally describe it as an epic space opera, far future science fiction involving, a lot of adventurous space travel, post-human civilization, post scarcity into what I call post necessity, economics, and yes, the post-humans are what we would call genetically engineered, though I like to use the word designed
Right.
in the novel and in that world. There are strictures and constraints on how people can be designed, on who can use what types of genes and where they can live. And it's a little bit of a different conceptualization, and I hope a more positive and um, perhaps even a little bit of a blueprint of the way I would like to see genetic engineering be implemented if we are going to take that route, which I suspect at some point is inevitable, unless we just choose to completely outlaw it. But I think there's enough benefits to be had that people, once they know it's safe and we can do it in a controlled fashion, um, they will try. Now, the history of Meru before the book takes place, but in that world, and between, where we are today and where that particular story takes place, there was a lot of very badly done genetic engineering and harmful implementations of it before they arrive at a more stable, more beneficial way of approaching it. And that might also be realistic. I don't know. I'm kind of hoping that with so many science fiction authors tackling the subject and bioethicists as well tackling the subject now, that we'll find a way to traverse that path with less harm done along the way.
Yeah. And a key concept within the world building that you created, I'm assuming it's about 1,000 years into the future. Is that
Right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so we've got these post-human beings called alloys, and apparently these two books are called the Alloy Era. That's what I learned
Right.
on Goodreads. Yeah. So it's an era of the future where we've got these alloys, post-humans, who coexist with humanity, and they have ultimately been genetically designed. Perhaps could you explain this concept a little bit more? What are the alloys, and how do they relate to humanity?
Yeah, they are our distant descendants from a genetic or evolutionary standpoint, except they did not evolve through natural selection. They evolved through design. And I'm going to take a step back and say one of the core principles I played with in the world of Meru is the idea of a sort of universal consciousness or consciousness as a natural property of the universe, which today is part of the philosophy of panpsychism. And because in the alloy era, people accept this as fact. One of the things they want to do is find a way to live in the universe without affecting other planetary bodies, without having to settle on planets or moons or asteroids. And so what they have done is designed their own bodies to exist in the vacuum of space. And in the vacuum of space, you're they are still pulling some amount of resources from Earth and from the solar system, but they're trying to minimize what they need. They have wings that collect light from the sun, and they use that to electrolyze water to produce oxygen because they are still somewhat biological beings. They have DNA. And then they use the hydrogen byproduct as a way to maneuver in space by venting gas. And they have chromatophores to communicate since there's no air. So they use light, as well as they do have some not so organic componentry that is coded into their DNA. And I was really inspired by a few different things for the alloys. I wanted beings who are at least related to humankind and who have organs that resemble humans, but at the same time, I pulled from other forms of life on Earth that survive in very, very harsh conditions to kind of make it realistic and try to figure out a way that, if we could assemble DNA kind of like we do a bunch of Lego bricks, and actually make it work. What could we pull from, with the known vast database of flora and fauna on Earth to create beings that could potentially inhabit the vacuum of space and thrive?
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that these beings, they don't just live on Earth, they've spread throughout the galaxy, right? But they have
Right.
a kind of their role on Earth is, well, how would you describe it? They're kind of looking
They're
after the planet.
caretakers. Yeah,
Caretakers,
yeah,
yeah.
they're stewards or
Yeah.
caretakers very much of everything on the planet, including the human beings who still live on Earth because they are not well suited to live. We are not well suited to
Right.
live anywhere else. And the
Right.
alloys, yeah, they have helped sort of rehabilitate the Earth's ecosphere, to rewild a lot of its spaces, and to kind of make sure that humanity can thrive and live on Earth without having to destroy their environment the way,
And
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 consume it the
yeah.
way we do.
And I think an interesting thing is also within this world that humanity itself, we have kind of reined back on our destructive impulses.
Right.
We're kind of conditioned to thinking that um, ambition itself is essentially destructive, or
Right.
it is often leads to destruction and chaos, and that's what's caused all of the environmental degradation in the past and the failed terraforming of Mars and things like that. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I thought it was quite an interesting idea that
Yeah.
yeah,
Which,
ambition is
well, which
turned
part?
into a kind of
Right.
disorder. Yeah, yeah,
Right. Unchecked ambition, or too much excessive ambition is a psychological disorder. Well, I was thinking about, a lot of the things, again, that have evolved just over the past, several centuries, and our viewpoints on various types of disorders and treating them as disorders as opposed to just a bad personality, right? Like it's not wickedness, it's not evil, it's not sinful, it's a disorder. And an unchecked greed or unchecked ambition or whatever is considered excessive past a social norm is now something that you can be treated for so that you can live more happily within these limitations.
Right. So that is the prevailing mood among humans in this vision of the future. But at the same time, we've got the protagonist or the protagonists from both books. In the first book is Jayanti, who is a human woman who kind of goes against the grain in a sense. And then in the second book, it's her daughter, who in a totally different way also it is quite has quite ambitious goals, let's say.
Right.
Yeah. So what was I going to ask? Yeah, so I actually one thing that I found, like, one of the first things I noticed when I started reading Meru, I thought it was quite interesting. Well, firstly, the title, right? Because I Googled it and I thought, okay, so the only reference I could find was Mount Meru, like the sacred mountain in Hindu cosmology. Am I right in thinking that that's where the name comes from?
Yes, that
Okay,
is
great.
absolutely right.
Right, I thought it might be. And then the each chapter title has a Sanskrit title, which is just one word, and then it's got the English translation. And then Loka, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is also a Sanskrit word. So, like within Hindu cosmology, right? So I
It
just
doesn't
want.
have to be. I would say that one's not so much in the Hindu cosmology, just a Sanskrit word meaning
Oh, okay.
world. Yeah.
Um, right. That was just my Googling, but
Yeah, Meru, I was thinking the abode of the gods because in a lot of ways the posthuman alloys are, would I think look at them as almost godlike figures in terms of
right.
what they're able to do, right? Especially compared to Homo sapiens, the basic human being.
Yeah, I was thinking that the alloys do kind of have godlike qualities to them, and they also, as we learn, have the ability to create an incarn, which is
Mm,
like a humanoid version of themselves, which can live on the surface of a planet, whereas their
right,
true form lives up on out in orbit. And
right.
that kind of reminded me of like the concept of avatars.
hmm
Like,
I
yeah,
Avatar is a Sanskrit word as well,
yeah,
and
yeah,
is literally the human embodiment of a god on Earth.
right,
It's just that would have been the more natural word to use, except one, I think it's taken on a very different meaning in modern times, and so I didn't want to try to co-opt it for something else. And two, the incarn concept, I figured certain words in the alloy society. The alloy society had existed for several hundred years before the story of Meru takes place, and in the contemporary Meru alloy society, Sanskrit is a popular semi-dead language that people have resurrected. But there
right.
have been other waves of languages that were popular, and so I decided to kind of pull in something more Latin rooted for the incarns, just to go somewhere different and figure it's an older concept for them, so it could be an older word.
Okay, so we've got this Sanskrit terminology and some of these ideas which come from Hindu tradition. So I was wondering, to what extent did like Hindu tradition inspire you in the creation of the story?
Yeah, so I would say it's the Hindu philosophy was something of an inspiration, as well as a mythological story from the Mahabharata that I enjoyed in my childhood about this couple, Nala and Damayanti. So I kind of echoed the main characters' names, and that was sort of my springboard for the original plot, was taking this very ancient story, setting it, far in the future. As I developed the world and the characters and the story, I moved very far away from it. So I don't call it a retelling. It's not a retelling anymore. It's kind of its own thing. But that definitely was a little bit of an inspiration. And philosophically, I would say, I mean, there are a number of concepts from ancient Hindu philosophy, from the Vedas, from the Upanishads. A few would be nonviolence. So one of the ways in which Meru is very different from traditional space opera as we conceive it today is there are no battles, there are no battleships, there's no lasers, there's no fighting. This is a society that eschews violence and finds it to be, even small acts of violence are criminal. And they have a pretty broad definition of what constitutes violence, as well as this idea of Brahman or God or whatever you want to call it being in everything in the universe. Again, in everything from the dirt under your feet to the ants to cats and dogs and humans and the sky and the planets. And that ties back to panpsychism, which is as well as, there's several other philosophies around the world. I think going beyond animism to, again, to non-living entities. And so I was not raised very Hindu. Part of my family is atheist. Part of my family is traditional practicing Hindu. So I kind of have inhabited both spaces, but I've definitely, was exposed to a lot of the literature and the concepts growing up. And so it's always a bit there, back of mind.
Yeah. Well, it's an interest of mine because back when I was at university, I took a module in Introduction to Hinduism, and we also had an overseas program. So at the end of the second year, we went to study in Bangalore, like Indian religion. But anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. But yeah.
Well, I'll ask you a quick question. Did you pick up on some of that as you were reading the book? Did you feel like it had echoes of that as you were going through it?
Okay, so yeah, my understanding of the concepts is a bit rusty, but yeah, there are a few things. Firstly, the concept of the incarn, which to me felt quite reminiscent of an avatar.
Right.
And some of the philosophical concepts you mentioned, like ahimsa, non-violence, yeah, quite a wide concept of non-violence, as you say. I noticed that within Loka, which is mostly set on Earth, we learn a lot more about the values of Earth society in that time, and I get the impression that people have given up meat.
Yeah.
Right. So I didn't see any references
for the most part. Yeah.
For the most part.
There are some cultures drawing on their very indigenous roots that are allowed to have a limited amount.
But for the most part, it's something we've left behind. Although fish is still a part of some people's diet, but yeah, so little things like that. But I didn't realize you were influenced by the Mahabharata. Now, I should add that there is a kind of romance element especially to the first book, to Meru. Would you say that that original story, because I'm not familiar with it, is it a romance? Yeah.
It is. It doesn't quite follow Western romantic beats, which was one of the reasons I was drawn to it. Because in the original story, Nala and Damayanti get together fairly early on, and
Right.
they get married, and then a series of misfortune strikes them. They're separated, and eventually they have to find their way back to each other. And Nala has to reclaim his kingdom, and so it's not so much the Western romantic beats are usually that the couple meets and they fall in love, and then they have to face obstacles, and they often have to make a decision to choose each other, and it ends with them getting married or deciding to get married or stay together, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, it's like, no, they are husband and wife and married, and they have children, and then like the adventure really starts after that.
Right. So yeah, the second book, Loka, features Jayanti's, who's the protagonist in the first book, her daughter, who is quite an interesting character because she is like a hybrid human alloy, the daughter of a human and alloy, but they don't. Well, there's another point there. They don't reproduce in uh, like the way we understand today, right? So
Right.
so anyway, the point is she has an alloy parent and a human mother. So she's got quite a unique status and biology, and she decides to go to Earth, which is her home planet, although she's not, most of her young life, she's not been there at this point in the story. And then she decides to embark on a challenge. Can you explain a bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so the main character Loka, Akshaya, has grown up with her parents away from Earth for reasons I won't spoil, um, and is setting foot on Earth for the first time, when she's 16 and a half years old. But her mother, Jayanti, who has gone to the planet Meru in the first book, um, has basically genetically designed her child to be compatible with the ecology of Meru, and has always intended to settle on that planet with her family. Her child being a teenager, being this hybrid, being someone who has feels like she's been somewhat deprived of her human heritage, is not so on board with this particular plan, and decides to embark on something called the Anthro Challenge, where she and a friend will circumnavigate the Earth with no, well, basically using only human era technology and human powered technology, with no assistance from the alloys who generally help and and take care of everyone on Earth. And so it is part around the world in 80 days, though they don't have a true, it's not a competition. There's no wager of that sense, with money riding on the line, but there are other stakes, and so it's part travelogue, part adventure, part coming of age, and really Akshaya finding her place uh, in the world of the Alloy universe.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it, actually. And actually, I really liked Around the World in 80 Days, and it certainly brought back memories of that book. Although obviously it's a very a very different book.
Right.
But yeah, I thought it worked well on a number of levels. I think as a travelogue, it's quite fascinating seeing this version of our planet in the future where we can kind of recognize some things, but other things maybe not, or are quite far removed from the society we're in today. So I noticed, for example, a lot of the place names, I was trying to figure out when I saw it like at the name of a city or a place, I think, no, where is that? And and then I would Google it, and sometimes I didn't really find anything. So I thought, okay, maybe that's something you created. And then sometimes I find it was some like an alternative name for another place. Um, so that it's like that any kind of travelogue, it gets me interested in the places you're looking at. And yeah, so I enjoyed that.
That's great. No, I had a lot of fun with the place names because one of the things I wanted to do with this future society and as part of sort of moving the earth back into a state where a more natural state, let's say, with less technological human influence, fewer cities, far fewer people, human people living on the planet, and as a part of all of that and all of the history, I tried with each location to find the oldest named city in that location wherever I could.
Right.
Sometimes I would take like a name of the oldest known civilization that lived in that area, so the name of a tribe or an ethnic group, and then I would use that to kind of create a place name. And
Okay.
so that's why not everything would turn up by Googling.
Okay.
So
So
yeah, so it was an interesting exercise and kind of there's actually I'll have to find the exact link, but there is a project online that someone has started where they are trying to create a map of all the indigenous tribes around the world. So trying to find basically the oldest, again, the oldest civilization, known named civilization or group of people who name themselves in any given area. And so that was one of my references.
okay then. Right. So there is a reason you chose the name for each place. It's not just
Yes.
random. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah. It doesn't always easily come up in a search. So
Right.
yeah. Um,
But
so
there are maps
yes, the maps
in
do
the book
help.
that you can kind of, yeah, you can kind of guess from the map locations, hopefully, at
Yeah.
least know roughly where we're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, Loka has quite a different focus of the story from Meru because it's almost entirely set on Earth,
Right.
whereas Meru is set kind of, well, it's partly on the planet Meru, but it's in our solar system as well, and it's kind of all over the place. So I think, for me, both books, although they are in a sense they're one story, but they also feel quite distinct in their style. Um,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I would. I've described it as chocolate and peanut butter. You can enjoy them separately. They're better together. Best in order. If you read Meru first and then Loka, but honestly, I think it can. People can read Loka on its own. People can read it first and go back and read Meru, and I think there's still plenty to get out of Meru, even knowing what you know in Loka. So yeah, while it's a series, I don't consider Loka a direct sequel. They're almost like two standalone books set in that same universe, one taking place, roughly 16, 17 years after the other one. And
right.
intertwined, but not necessarily a direct sequel in the way, of a traditional duology or trilogy where it might be completing the story. I would say each of them has their own complete stories.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. So do you think you'll ever want to expand this world even more, write any more books, or are you happy with these two as a duology?
I think there are more stories I could tell, and I have ideas for more stories in this universe. Whether there are more books set in it is going to depend partly on my publisher. There could also be shorter books like novellas or short stories that I might set in this universe. It doesn't necessarily have to involve a full length novel. Um, but I think I would also, just for my own sake, I probably step away from this universe for a little while just to play in other sandboxes. I tend to be a very idea-driven writer.
Yeah.
And and I don't know, like I think I would have to kind of come up with an idea that I want to explore about the Alloy era universe before I would develop it into like a full length novel. So, like I said, I have stories about other characters, other settings that I think could be really interesting, like um, the alloys who, like Vaha's maker, who travels interstellar distances to try to discover new locations in the galaxy, right? To tell a story from that character's perspective, but that would be more of a character story than an idea story.
Right.
So yeah, and in the meantime, I have no shortage of ideas. So I already have thoughts on other books I could write, other universes I can build, and so
Right.
I may just play in those sandboxes because with Meru, I started like the planning and research phase for it. I think I started in the second half of 2019. So it's been, I've spent a good 5 years in this particular world, and I think I'm ready to try some other ideas for a little while.
Okay. Is there any project that you're working on at the minute? Is there anything else you're writing?
I actually have been taking a break the last several months. I have written a short story, and I'm about to embark on another interesting short story for various solicited projects. And I haven't yet started working on another novel, though. Like I said, I have some ideas. One requires some pretty extensive world building. The other is kind of a departure for me. It would be a contemporary fantasy.
Okay.
And so I might tackle that one first just because there's less overhead, and then delve deep into another sort of big world building exercise. Um, so we'll see.
Okay.
So yeah, I finished up the edits for Loka, I think in like February or March, and I've honestly these last few years since getting sick, it's been hard to keep up on reading alongside my writing, just because my functional brain hours are so limited. So I've been catching up on reading a lot of books this year, which has been great. I mean, the piles of books of unread books on my physical shelf and my e-reader have just been growing and growing. So it's nice to start whittling them down a little bit.
So can I ask which authors do you like to read then?
I've been focusing a lot on new authors for the most part. Recently, I would say. Though, what did I pick up? That's I guess established authors would be like Malka Older's novella from last year, the mimicking of known successes, and then yeah, because I'm a member of the SFWA and I often participate in Worldcon. I can vote in the Hugo and Nebula Awards, so I try to focus on more recent publications, and I really try to give debut authors, a fair shot there. So like some recent reads I've really enjoyed are The Sleepless by Victor Manabo, which is
Oh,
near
yeah.
future. Have you read that?
I yeah, not only
It's
have
on
I
your
read
list?
it, I interviewed him.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
So he was the first person I interviewed on his
Oh,
channel.
very cool. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting book, very much an idea driven, again,
Yeah.
type of near future science fiction, which I always enjoy. And then a couple of fantasies, The Garden of Delights by Amal Singh, I thought was really beautiful. The Saint of Bright Doors, Vajra Chandrasekhar's book, which has been making headlines with a lot of award nominations and is richly deserved. I've also had the Oh, and then The Wings Upon Her Back, Samantha Mills. I thought that was really interesting, a sort of steampunk techno fantasy. It's like second world, but it's a society that works on technology that might be driven by magic, but not in the usual way of spells and magic being called magic. So I thought that was a really interesting novel. Like it's a great bridge between science fiction and fantasy. And and I blurbed a couple of books that haven't come out yet.
Oh yeah.
The Night Word by R.S.A. Garcia, which and also Interstellar Mega Chef by Lavanya Lakshminarayan. I'm like, really excited for both those to hit in October and November, I think. Um, very, very different books, but both were a lot of fun. The Night Word is just a fast-paced second world fantasy. I won't spoil it, but there's a pretty big twist towards the end. And then Interstellar Mega Chef, which I'm pitching to people as The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy meets the Great British Baking Show.
Okay.
It's cheeky, it's fun, it's got a lot of very pointed and relevant social commentary as well in terms of our digital age.
Okay. And how about when you were younger, when you were growing up and you were sort of dipping your toes into science fiction? Like, who did you read back then?
I think that the three most influential authors for me were Frank Herbert and CJ Cherry and Joan D. Binge. I think I've probably read just about every single one of their books in my formative years, my teenage years. Um, and then I guess in the interval, or maybe more like not in the past year, but in the past 10 to 15 years, I have really enjoyed Ken Liu, Yoon-Ha Lee, and Lecky's work, the Expanse novels. I didn't read all of them. I think I read the first three.
Right.
Um, yeah, I'm like glancing at my bookshelf. Uh, oh, Cameron Hurley's work. I love her books. So yeah, those are some of my other favorites, recent favorites. Oh, Rika Aoki's Light of Uncommon Stars. That takes place in LA and areas that were very much my haunts, my college haunts, and so that was really fun. And that's another one that blurs genres in a way that I think is really fun. You know, there's science fiction, there's aliens, there's deals with the devil and magic, so all in one book that's set in contemporary times. That was brilliant.
Okay, great.
And
And
then, oh, I guess I should mention most recent novel I read is Reset by Serena Dalan, and I'm doing a bookstore event with her in San Diego in a couple of weeks, and that was a really interesting idea book, which is that there's been sort of this cataclysmic war, and a handful of people are saved. But in order to not, it has an interesting parallel to Meru, which I'm going to talk to her about. But in order to avert this kind of disaster in future, every, I forget, 4 or 5 years, people's memories are wiped clean, and they start over with new names, new jobs, new everything, in order to, avoid carrying past grievances, avoid being too attached to things. And I thought that was a really interesting take on solving a similar kind of problem to, what the people of the Alloy era, the humans engineering themselves to not be so ambitious and greedy. So
yeah,
interesting, very
that
interesting book,
sounds
and part of a
intriguing.
trilogy. Yeah.
Okay. So did you say that was called Reset?
Hmm.
What, who was the author again?
Serena Dahlan, Dahlan.
Okay. I don't know her, but I'll look it up. Um, Great. Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff there. Um, so yeah, I think if there's anyone here who's watching this and has made it this far, and they want to learn more about you and your work, where can they go?
The best place is just go to my website, which is very easy, sbdivya.com. There's a contact form. People can reach out to me there. If you're curious about my social media, I'm on Instagram as sbdivya_author, and also you can find me on Blue Sky and Mastodon as well.
Okay, thank you, Divya. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to checking out more of your work. Very soon I'm planning to read this book, which was published a few years ago. It's one of your books, short
Collection
story
of short
collection,
stories.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which also includes Runtime, which
Yeah.
was that the first your first book to be
First,
published? Yeah.
yeah, first
Yeah.
standalone book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Way back in 2016.
Yeah. Okay. So I will be reading that soon. I don't have a copy of Machinehood, but I'll probably, it's on my radar. So
Wonderful. Thank you so
yeah.
much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.